Ledger is a writing podcast and my attempt to shrink the distance just a little bit more between humans. I'm your host, Austin Wilson. Welcome to today's show, and I'm chatting with Kyle Winkler. He's the author of the forthcoming Ship of Death. It comes out September 29th, 2026 from Harper Collins, and I really do think it's going to be a big book. It already has blurbs from Wil Wheaton, Dan Shawn, Chuck Wendig. I think it's really going to be one to watch out for, and I'm so pumped to read it. But I've already read stuff that Kyle has published, and that's one of the big things we talk about here. He has a book called The Nothing That Is. That's one of the first things we talk about. How did it get published? And his books after that, Tone Bone, Grasshands, Boris Says the Words, Oh Pain, Enter the Peerless. He's got a lot of great weird fiction, weird horror. There's a lot of different definitions for it, but weird horror, I think, really does put a good point on it. And if you like those kinds of things, you're probably going to dig his books. So we talk about how he has a PhD and an MFA, and those aren't necessarily things that people associate with, weird horror. We also talk about a topic that comes up quite a bit on here, which is place, where you're born, where you live, how it plays into who you are as a writer and what you write. Kyle's also from Indiana like me, so that's one of the reasons it comes up. We talk about how he works into writing the indescribable and using a word like necropotent, which the origin might surprise you or it might not, depending on how much you love card games. You'll see what that means. But also we talk about, community and how that plays a part into himself as a writer and what he does, and also playing with form when it comes to stories, because The Ship of Death is a book that is told just through found documents. So he's definitely playing with the form of the story and the novel there. At a couple points late in the interview, it sort of sounds like we're on a rocket that is about to take off, and that's not thematic. I think one of our heaters was kicking on because it is February, so it's kind of chilly while we were chatting. So if you hear that like whistling, that's what it is. It's a heater. And honestly, a better editor could have taken care of that, but I am just a serviceable editor at best, so apologies. As for my stuff, go to austinrwilson.com. Check out my work there. You can follow me on Instagram at mosshartbooks. You can also go to mosshartbooks.com, order any of Kyle's books through me if you want. You can also go to bookshop.org. Moss Heart Books does have a bookstore front on bookshop.org. We get a little bit kicked back from any of the purchases you make through our bookstore there. For Kyle's stuff, go to kylewinkler.net. You can look up all the stuff that he's written there, and I think maybe buy some stuff, or he has links to buy some stuff there. But as for now, here is my chat with Kyle Winkler. But to kind of catch our listeners up here, I want to talk about your first book, when it came out, who published it, and then we can kind of draw a line through where that is to where you are now.
So my first book was called The Nothing That Is, and it was released in mid-April of 2021. So it's getting on 5 years now. And I published it. It didn't have a publisher. It was self-published. Technically it was through KDP, Amazon's online publishing outfit. And do you want to know why I did it?
Yes.
Okay, so at the time... So this was 2021. So I had started reading, going into the pandemic, I had started reading more independent, like indie lit, and specifically horror lit. I don't know how I found my way into that, but I was reading things like True Crime by Samantha Kolesnik, which was published by Grindhouse Press, which is based out of Dayton, Ohio. And then I read Negative Space by B.R. Yeager, published by Apocalypse Party. And those, and amongst other things, I always use those two as the main ones because they were the ones that really sort of bookend my brain at that time.
Yeah.
But I was reading a lot of other stuff, and I was sort of just blown away by this. I was like, this writing is better than a lot of other stuff I'm reading right now from like Big Five publishing, and it was done by the community. It was community oriented, and as I started getting deeper and reading more, I started finding that there are people who were just releasing stuff on their own, and it looked good, right? Like the materialities of writing had gotten so good in the last decade, I had toyed around with releasing a collection of stories in a novella in around 2009, 2010, through Lulu, right? The first real thing. And I remember I had a friend of mine who had, the whole process was so agonizing because I had to give my file to somebody to format, which was totally weird, and they didn't know what they were doing. And I had a friend do the cover, and it was just, nothing came together. And I had one proof that I ordered just to have it, and it was so cool. And then I just never followed up on any of it. But I should have, because people who got there early, even though their book sat around online for a long time, people were just eager and hungry to read stuff. They probably would have been selling a lot. But in any case, I said, let me dip my toes into this, because at the time I'd had an agent. I was working with somebody who was really digging my writing, and we were working on a book, which was Grasshands. I had written a book prior to that, and which was Boris Says the Words. It wasn't called Boris Says the Words, but I had gotten interest of an agent through a friend, and he was like, revise the book. This is Boris. And I said, okay, but I revised it so far from the original that he was like, yeah, I don't want it anymore. And I was like, he's like, but if you write another book, let me know. I was like, okay. I was pretty hurt by that. And when I moved from Pennsylvania to Ohio, I went through a lot of, my parents died in quick succession, 3 months apart, boom, boom. And I was just really in this well of grief and personal other stuff. I moved, started a new job. My parents died. My wife had a horrible miscarriage, and we had house issues. It was all the worst possible stuff.
Oh gosh, yeah.
But I was like, I'm going to write a saleable book. Right. And that ended up being Grasshands. And I got the attention of that former agent's assistant, who was now his own agent.
Hell yeah.
And so we started working on that. But in the midst of all this, I was like, I want to try this. I want to try this because it'll cost me nothing and I had a little extra money, because when my parents died, they had just a little bit of money that they left me and my brother. And I had the blessing of my wife to take just a little bit of that, and to put it towards a good cover designer, a good interior person, another interior artist, a proofreader, editor, and then, I think that was it. So, and that was, not cheap, but also not, people think it's probably thousands and thousands. It wasn't thousands and thousands of dollars, no. But it wasn't pocket change. And when I remember I asked my agent this, I was like, hey, what do you think about me self-releasing something? He was like, well, big hesitation, right? He was like, what if it's no good? And I was like, what do we mean? He was like, well, what if nobody likes it? And I was like, I don't give a shit. He's like, yeah, but your name's attached to it. And I was like, okay. I mean, a lot of people hate a lot of Stephen King's books, but also like some of Stephen King's books, right? You could pick any person on the bookshelves I have. If they've got more than one book, a lot of people hate some of what they've written. Some people like what I was like, I don't give a shit. But he was like, you know what? You do what you want to do. It's fine. Because we were so focused on this other thing. So I said, okay. So I went forward with that. Released it. And I think part of the reason why, I don't know if I have an objective way to say this, but I think the book did well.
Yeah.
For what it was. I didn't do any marketing. I did not try to drum up anything. I released the book online. I mean, I released the cover online, and friends of mine that I knew were hyped about it, retweeted it, and this is on Twitter at the time, or shared stuff on Instagram, Insta, as the kids call it.
Insta, it's very hip.
The gram, whatever
yes,
it is.
The gram.
The gram, IG. So, those two main places were where all that stuff was happening. And suddenly I started getting, people were like, hey, can I interview you? Hey, do you want to come to my YouTube channel and talk about this? Or then it was getting a review on this website or something. And I was like, holy shit, this is connecting. This is really cool.
It's funny that your agent would ask, what if everyone hates it? And
then it did the opposite.
Well, but also the idea of being like, well, do you think just because if you sell Grasshands to a Big Five publisher or to a Big Five imprint, that's not still a possibility?
Oh yeah, no, I think what he meant was he's like, we're going into business together basically to do this
Yeah.
one project. And I think, I'm not saying that this is what he thought, but and we've talked about this since then, but like, cause he's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And he's not my agent anymore, but he's a good friend of mine. I would say, I think that part of it's like, well, if you're, well, it makes sense. If you're doing this one thing and you're going to do something else over here,
Yeah.
that's not related to it, in publishing, that can kind of interfere, right? Because publishers
also,
get really, 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 skittish about like, oh, you're doing more than one thing, and like, this is ours, and what are you doing over here? And we can talk about this later with the current stuff that's going on, but like, I could see how these parallel tracks would cause a little friction.
Yeah, I get it. And also, I mean, maybe it's like uncouth to say, but it's like he doesn't make money unless you make money. And
that's true. Yeah.
Releasing a thing by yourself does not make him well. Money. Yeah, it doesn't work in the system that he is working inside.
Now, the twist to this story is that I sent him a copy of The Nothing That Is, right?
Yeah.
A month or so later or whatever. And he read it and he loved it. And he was like, why didn't you fucking send this to me? Like, we could have done, and I thought about it and I was like, yeah, maybe I did shoot myself in the foot. Maybe that would have been the first real big book, and that would have broken me out and gotten me an ability to do stuff. I don't know, but I don't really dwell on that too much because I like where I am. I was going to make this point earlier, but I skipped over it. I was part of the community and then decided to do something. It wasn't, I did a thing and looked for a community to exploit.
Yeah.
It was, I like these people. I want to be around you. I like what you're reading. I like what you're talking about. I like the ethos, the aesthetic. I liked all of it. And I was persuaded and convinced that I could do it. Right. Which is a totally different, I hate the word when people say like organic, but it was like, it came out of a real need that I had to play with these people, to play with the toys, to get in there. And that happened. And I think that was, any success that book had comes directly from a couple of people that I've talked about before. One is Richard Mirabella, who's a fantastic writer and a friend of mine, who had a lot of followers on Twitter and somehow found out about the book, read it, loved it, and hyped it up.
Yeah.
My current editor, Peter Kispert, also found it and read it, posted about it on Instagram. And then another novelist who was a colleague of mine for a little bit, who's still a real dear friend of mine, Christian Kiefer, retweeted it. And so, it created this life of its own, and it just like spread out. And it's still, it's still my best-selling book. And when I say best-selling, I don't mean like hundreds of copies every day, but
sure,
it still sells. And I'm sort of like very thankful that some stranger wants to read it. Now, if you go on Goodreads and you read the reviews, people will be like, "Oh, fuck no, this is so stupid," or "This is monster of the week," or whatever. I'm like, you know what? Hey, you know what? You spent the time to buy the book and took the time to review it. That's a win in my book. That's how I view that.
I think, well, one, I view the book as successful by kind of any metric that you can put on it, for one reason, which is that you have written other books afterwards.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
And also the idea that it exists and people know about it, and whether or not you end up at a place, like, spoiler for the listeners, like, I asked that because I knew you self-published it.
Yeah,
right. But the reason is because self-publishing now in 2026 means nothing what it used to mean, like the idea of what self-publishing used to mean.
Right.
And I've talked about it briefly recently on other episodes. I think Ira Rat and I even talked about it a little bit, about the idea that self-publishing, this like stigma that existed along with the idea of being like, well, he released it himself. Like, it's not floated away completely. There is still that stink in some people's mind that it's a thing you just released, like, oh, anyone can publish their own book now. But also, like, when I have a copy of The Nothing That Is in my hand that you published and released, I'm not like, this is a lesser book. Like, it's a book to me. It is still just the story that was released that I was interested in.
Right.
And now, printing technology, distribution, access to graphic designers, all of these
Everything's
things.
changed.
It's all changed.
Yeah. 15 years ago, the reality of all that, what I call the materialities of writing, you know, all the physical aspects of it. There were people out there who are still, there always are people who are fantastic writers who just can't get their work into print.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But in the last 15 years, what's changed is that with the shift from analog to digital, though, in the way that a lot of people read, and I think it really did take the sort of ebook revolution to break out first before people could get on board with self-published physical books.
Yeah.
Because they're what people realized was, and this is my theory, is that people were for hundreds of years, people were attached to the physical object of the book. I mean, I am still, obviously.
Sure, me too, yes.
So you have the physical book, and when the book had when it looked like a legit book, when it had the right paper and the right binding, and when it had the colophon and the logo, and it had all the things that look like a book, people were okay with that. But when people self-published a book 25, 30 years ago, it didn't look like that. It looked like a toy that a child had made or something.
Yes.
It had that off-brand feel that generic products had before we liked generic products. You know, you were like, ugh. And now, though, now that all this stuff has changed, that now books look, quote unquote, like the way we expect them to, and now that people have been holding on to a Kindle or a Kobo or a Nook that is just a tablet with the words, they've sort of disassociated that. And what I think people have come to understand is that the quality of the writing is the thing they care about most. And so now all these people who are really good writers, who have fantastic stories to tell, are pouring into the space that meets the materialities of writing, and the self-publishing boom reaches its peak. And that's where we are. There are other issues that come around that, right? But really, I think that's how I view it anyway. So,
I think a lot of that matches up with reality, and to be able to go from it, costing, like someone going to self-publish their books 20 years ago, it's like, okay, do you have $15,000?
Yeah.
And now it's like
cost prohibitive,
$1,500 to $2,000, depending on what you want, and
it could be even less depending on what you do.
Yeah, it's a different world, and I think it has led to a lot of good stuff, a lot of bad stuff, obviously too. But that's a bigger ball of wax that is.
It is
impossible.
It is a bigger ball of wax, and I want to real quick to say, like, you have to remember that you don't have to get taxed on stuff under $600. I think. Right. So that's the tipping point for a lot of things that people charge, because they don't want to fuck around with the IRS. So in reality, people who, you're looking at publishing a really, really good book anywhere between $500 to $1,000, depending on how many vendors or artists or other people you're helping you put that book together. And sometimes you do it on your own. Like I've had fantastic people doing work for me on these books. So on O'Pain and The Nothing That Is, I'm blanking on his last name, but his name is Scott. And this is so bad of me to not remember this, but he did fantastic work on the layout, and I ended up having him doing the layout in Tonebone too. But for the third book, Boris, I was like, I want to do it myself. So I taught myself how to do InDesign, and then laid out the book. And I think it did pretty well. Yeah. It looks good. So anyway, point is that, if you're really enterprising, you could probably fill the role of any of those production stages at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's so many tools now outside of the bullshit AI garbage, but there's still so many tools now to give you the agency to be able to take your story and get it out there, even for $0. If that's really what you want to do, you can do it pretty easily.
Scott Cole, that's his name. He's also a horror author, by the way, a fantastic horror author.
Scott Cole. He did the design or just the layout of the books?
He does a lot of stuff, but I just had him do the interior design. His company, this is a free promo for him right here, 13 Visions.
13 Visions. Yeah. Everyone check it out. If you've got a book, you need layout, design, go check it out.
There you go.
You have a PhD in composition and rhetoric, and an MFA, and those are not necessarily things that would be associated with somebody who wrote a horror book called Tonebone. So I'm excited to talk about your identity as a writer, like where you came from, because obviously you'd been writing prior to 2021.
Yep.
I would love to know about the ways in which you showed up, other than reading those things and having those things affect you, because you don't just start writing out of nowhere, obviously, or if you do, it's early. So I would love to know about your formation. Like, how do you end up as someone with those credentials in academia and then someone who is like
Also writing
horror? Yeah.
Well, and I know I'm not the only one. You know, I think Cynthia Pelayo has a PhD.
I think she does, yeah.
And I know there's some other people who have MFAs. So I mean, there's some there, and there's some other academic horror. I know. Well, I'll think of some other names here in a minute. But how did I get there? Well, I was just telling my wife that I have 3 kids, and I have 2 boys and a little girl, and they're 9, 6, and 2. And the 2 boys are readers. The oldest one especially, and they're both advanced in their reading. I mean, this is not a surprise, though. I mean, my house is full of books. You can't move for all the books, and I read all the time, and my wife is a big reader, and we're always talking, and so it makes sense. When you model it and you do it, your kids do it. And because of that going on, I was talking to my wife about this. I was like, man, that was the only thing I was ever really like excelled at, was I was always in advanced reading. Like in 2nd and 3rd grade, I was always pulled out in a little side group to do the SSR reading, like the little I don't know if people remember this. They had like color-coded boxes, and you'd open it and there'd be little books and stuff, and you'd work with the teacher and do questions and stuff.
Yeah.
And then high school, I was always in whatever class that was, and then I was always one step ahead in college, taking the course that I should have been taking, you know, the year after, whatever, and blah blah blah. And by the time I got to college, my dad was like, "What are you gonna do? And what are you gonna major in?" And I was like, I don't know, you know. And he was very trying to be practical, like, well, where do you see yourself in 10 years? And I was like, I don't fucking know. 28. I was like, that's so forever ago.
Yeah.
Which is funny now. But he said, well, you should do business. Business would be a good degree to go. And I was like, fuck that shit. Like, I mean, I'm not much different than I was then. I had earrings. My hair is still long, but it was much longer, you know, and I was wearing like, you know, bell bottom, everything was thrifted clothes. I was, you know, I didn't want to be a part of that at all. It would have been antithetical to my personality. So I was like, what degree can I get where I just read books? And it was an English major. And, and then he started saying things like, my dad pivoted and was like, well, you're going to be a teacher. I was like, I don't want to teach. I don't want to teach at all. I don't want to teach. I just want to read books. And I tried to write a novel when I was in high school. I mean, I didn't get very far, but I was always writing stories when I was little. I remember when I was in 3rd grade, I was obsessed with the John Gardner and James Bond novels.
Oh, nice.
And so I would try to like write my own version of that, and I'd get like 5 or 6 pages in. I read a lot of the Star Trek novels when I was in 3rd and 4th grade, tried to write a Star Trek thing, you know, trying to teach myself, copy what it seemed like. And I would get like 3 or 4 pages and then stop or something, you know. But the instinct was always there. And then when I didn't write fiction, I was in a band and wrote lyrics.
Yeah.
Lyrics turned into poetry. Poetry turned into stories, you know. And you just have those moments where you're like, I'm just going to do this. This is what I want to do. This is how I express myself. So I got an English major. I have lots of degrees. I'm so overeducated and overdegreed. It's ridiculous. So I have associates in English, and I have a BA in creative writing. And that was, I remember I had a teacher in my creative writing class who I went to go see her in office hours or something about a story I wrote. And she told me, and maybe she said this to a lot of people, I don't know, but it meant a lot to me when she said it. She's like, I could see this being published in the New Yorker.
Oh.
Now, I don't know whether or not, actually, looking back on that story, I don't think it could have been, but it was very nice of her to say that. And I think what maybe she was doing was sort of like saying, you've got it.
Yeah.
You've got whatever it takes, but you need to, you know, work on it. And I took that very seriously. And I remember talking to a couple of other guys, other writers I knew, like, man, when someone acknowledges, like when an authority acknowledges that you have talent, you suddenly get really depressed because you realize you have to do something with it now.
Yep.
And so I was like, well, what do I do? I knew I wanted to go to an MFA, but I wasn't prepared right after. So I took a year off and worked at a newspaper for like a month and a half, quit that, worked as a substitute teacher and a tutor, did a bunch of stuff, and then got into the MFA program at WashU in St. Louis. And there, I mean, from there, that was pretty much sealed the deal, because I met other authors of my cohort, nonfiction essayists, poets, fiction writers, short story writers, creative experimentalists, all that stuff in my grades, but also the professional published people who came to visit, right? And not including my teachers, who were also fantastic. And when I came out of that, part of being a graduate student is you have to teach. And you can see where this goes, right? And kind of the only thing, I liked it. I was forced to do it, and I liked it. And so I ended up adjuncting. And this is where the academic part comes in, because when I moved back to Indiana and I had these adjuncting gigs in Fort Wayne, because I taught at IPFW for 4 years, I got another job teaching at Indiana Tech at their campus in Warsaw, Indiana, which is about 40 minutes west on State Road 30. And I also was teaching at Manchester University, which is about 40 minutes southwest of Fort Wayne. So I was had this little triangle of schools that I was teaching like a 7-7 load or something, I'm in my late 20s. I was trying to write, I was writing short stories, and I was trying to write a novel, and I was having some success with the stories. This was when the transition from hard copy journals to online journals was happening a lot.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was getting a lot of online success. Like people were taking we'll publish you online. And I was really feeling like that's not legit. I felt like no, I want to see my name in print.
Yeah.
So that was going on a lot. And I realized at some point I was sitting in my office at IPFW, and my office mate was behind me, and she was like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, we were back to back. And I was like, "I'm grading papers." And she went, "No, with your life." And I was like, "Whoa, what the fuck?"
Holy shit.
Yeah. What's that all about? What are you doing? And she was just proceeded to tell me this might've been strategic on her part, because she wanted a gig there, but she was like, they're not going to hire you full time. You need to go get a PhD. And I did. So I applied, and I got one, and I got into Pitt, and we moved to Pittsburgh. And I didn't write any fiction for a long time.
Yeah.
Because I thought I was so immersed in academia and academics and writing a really good academic book. I was still writing, but I wasn't writing fiction, I should say. I was writing a lot of academic essays and working on a lot of stuff. And my area of study is student writing. I study student writing. So I like working with freshmen, and I like working with freshmen writing and freshman essays, and seeing what they do and how they think and how they operate, and how they've learned how to write and how they adopt and how they change and blah, 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 blah. But it was in the midst of all of that I burned out. Unsurprisingly, happens to a lot of PhDs. And I was also working with a friend of mine via telephone, Chris Dennis, who's a fantastic short story writer. His collection came out with Soho Press. It's called Here's What You Do. And prior to that coming out, I was on the phone with him, you got to do something with these stories. We went to an MFA together, and I was like, you got to publish something. He's like, well, I don't know what to do, blah, blah. So I would be on the phone with him, and I would read his stories back to him, and we'd comment and do stuff. And I did that 2 or 3 times. And then finally he was like, okay, I'm going to put them together and send it to this agent. And he got an agent, and they published his book. And it was through him that it ended up being the first agent I went with in my story that I told you earlier. And I sent Boris Says the Words to. That agent was the one who was like, yeah, I'd love to see your stuff. And that's how that started, was because I'd been reworking on this novel off and on, and sent it to him and got interest in it. And I thought, wow, after years of sending things to agents, almost 8 years, finally there was a real answer. And I was like, wow, this is really it. This is really going to happen. And it didn't, of course, but it showed me something. I had, again, it was that moment in undergrad. I have the capability to do it.
I'm so curious though, if in all of that time, and you probably kind of already answered this because you talked about 8 years, were there figures of either perceived authority or even figures of actual quote unquote authority within the writing world who told you the opposite of the you do got it?
Like you don't, like you should quit?
Yeah.
No, I don't think I ever, I mean, I think I was lucky enough to never encounter anybody in that position who was like, you should pack it up, kid.
Yeah.
You know, you should pursue something else. I think I was the one who did that. I was the one who told my wife, I'm done writing. I'm never going to write ever again. And she was like, okay, yeah, whatever. Right. Call me on the day. Right.
All right, bro.
Yeah. Cool story, bro. Like I think she always knew, you know, but like I was the one who did that. I was the one who told myself that I'm not going to do it. I don't have it. Cause I am the worst, like all writers, your worst critic. Like I have such crippling self-doubt. It's crazy. You know, like why would anyone want to read my stuff? Why should I waste my time even writing it? Blah, 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 blah. No, I never met a professionally published writer who was like, hey, you don't have the goods. And it doesn't mean that I'm going to say it. Doesn't mean that I don't. I might not. I might have still been fooling everybody. We'll see.
Well, I was talking to someone previously on the show, and we were talking about how publishers are generally not like, we'll do this guy a favor. We'll spend thousands.
They don't do that.
They don't do that shit.
It's not. There's no mentions.
No.
Yeah, there's no like, hey, do me a solid in publishing. No, they're very much P&L, bottom line.
Yep.
For a lot of people on the outside who are like, oh, that's bullshit. I mean, for good reason though. I mean, there's.
Oh yeah, I mean they're putting up money. They need to make money back, which is also the reason why. And I have fallen back on this previously for myself, where I'm like, but they didn't say yes because they're just like, Austin's so nice. Like maybe somewhere that happened. Maybe somewhere someone thought that. But if they think the story is good enough to publish, I should accept that and just be like, okay, they're not doing me any favors. Yeah,
I know. It's not going to happen that way. The flip side of your question though is I did hear that from people in academe.
Yeah.
Right. The big people in academe who were like, no, you don't have the authority to write that, or no, you can't do that. There's a lot more gatekeeping in academic writing than there is in creative writing.
Yeah.
And creative writing still has lots of gatekeeping. You can imagine how much more academic writing has. And that's just, I'm not even including like peer review, which is like a necessary function of how academic writing gets created and distributed. But like just the sort of tacit networks that exist between mentors and mentees, between colleagues and things like that. There's just so much that can short circuit you or disrupt you, or, you know what I mean? It's so much more critical too, which I think is exactly because of the impact it makes, because it makes so little impact, right?
Yeah.
The everybody has to treat it like some sort of fucking Greek drama. Whereas creative writing, you can make a big splash on that book and people are like, oh yeah, we're not even going to bother to like, proofread it, or we're not even going to bother to like fact check it. Like famously, like a lot of nonfiction books don't even get fact checked these days. Yeah. Right. So, but how much money are people getting paid for that? And how many people are going to go read that book? And so you can see the inverse operations there. But
not to psychoanalyze, but maybe that's why you were like, well, how about I just release this novel by myself then?
Part of it was I always view it as and I'm not a religious person, but I always view it as that, not a religious person anymore, I should say.
Yeah.
That there is that scene in the Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is like one of my touchstone movies, where it's the leap of faith. He knows that he has to just step out into this abyss.
Yeah.
And he does, and he lands on this like perfectly disguised stone walkway. But he didn't know that was there, obviously. And, that's what the book was. The book was, let me see if I can stand on my own 2 feet or fall, right? At least I'll know where I am.
Yeah.
Right. And I needed to do something that would at least give me a barometer of where I was.
That makes sense to me. I think I've had moments like that before where I'm like, this is really going to give me an answer. And I will deal with whatever the answer is.
Right.
Doesn't matter what it is. Kind of touch on this already a little bit. You've even mentioned it. You're from Indiana. I live in Indiana. Sir. I usually don't talk about it unless it's relevant. And because you are from Indiana and I live in Indiana, I've also talked to other authors in Indiana. Brian Allen Carr.
Yep.
We talked a little bit, and specifically about the ways in which we either accept or reject where we are born and raised and live. And the big thing with that conversation that I had with Brian was that for the longest time I rejected even the urge to set a story in Indiana. that I was like, I'm not gonna write about that fucking place.
Yeah, well,
and
not me.
that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about it is because the Nothing That Is, and not even just the Nothing That Is, your other works too. Not all of them, but
I mean,
is it all of them? Is Ship of Death?
No, the Ship of Death takes place in Cleveland, but it's still the Midwest.
Yeah.
But the other book after that, The Substitute Teacher, takes place in Indiana.
Does it?
Yeah.
Well, see, so my weird obsession with not setting a thing in Indiana, because honestly, to really dig down into it, I felt like it seemed like either I was cheating or that this place didn't.
What do you mean cheating? Explain that. That's
I don't
interesting.
know. I think maybe that I was not being creative enough, that I was not engaging fully with my imagination to just be like, and then he went out into the backyard and there was a cornfield back there, which is a ridiculous thing for me to worry
That'd be
about.
a fantastic first line to a book, though.
Right. And that was my house growing up. Like literally.
That was all of our houses. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I know. And so I knew it. Like I knew that setting. And it seemed like I was somehow failing to not be like, he walked out into the street. I mean, I had streets.
Well, no, I know what you mean. You mean it's like, it's two-sided. One, it's like, it's so close to you, you don't understand it. I mean, Joyce said this. Joyce said he had to leave Ireland to write about Ireland.
Yes.
And I think that's there's something really big into that, because it's the whole idea of your environment is so close to you. It's the water you swim in, right? Fish swim in water. They don't know what water is, right? So we don't understand what our environment is. And it's not surprising that I had to leave Indiana.
Yep.
Right. I was doing some things that were in Indiana, but when I was in other parts of Indiana, I was writing about other parts. I wasn't writing about where I was when I lived there. I had to leave.
Right.
And I think that creates it's just a reflective moment. There's some sort of like a pupa gestation thing that goes on that sort of crystallizes, and then you can finally break it open and go, oh, okay, well, that's what the fuck that was about. Or this is how I see this now. And yeah, I mean, the Nothing That Is set in Indiana. Stories in O'Pain are set in Indiana, and O'Pain is actually not just like a thematic title, but when I wanted a title, I wanted to do something with all of the initials of the states that the stories took place in. Yeah. And they were all in the Midwest, and it was Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana spells O'Pain.
That's awesome.
That's how that title both came about, because it was worked thematically, and it sort of locked in with where the stories took place. So what comes out, Boris says the words, half of it takes place in Indiana and half of it takes place in a version of Russia that doesn't exist. Grasshands takes place in Indiana. Tonebone takes place in Indiana. Enter the Peerless takes place in Indiana. And then the first one that's sort of solely not in that state is Ship of Death. Yeah. Which is Ohio. But then I go back to Indiana for The Substitute Teacher.
See, and I feel like I was weirdly, it was a childish thought and sort of, I guess, handcuffs that I had put on myself to be like, you got to really push yourself, man. Why setting in Indiana? You know exactly what that's like, which is hilariously why I should have just been like, okay, it's in Indiana. Then I can write about that very astutely. But the reason why I wanted to talk about it, apart, from the stuff we've already said, is that Cade in The Nothing That Is very, very specifically confronts that idea of being from the Midwest in one portion and being not taken seriously. Yeah. Like some of his thoughts are actually pretty close to the thoughts that I probably had when I was like, well, this is in Chicago. It's not in Indiana because I was worried.
Oh, you mean like in the beginning when he's like, you might think that this would be a pretty backwards town, but we actually had, 3 microchip processor plants or whatever it was. And we did this and we did it. Yeah. So I'm from Vincennes, Indiana. That's my hometown, which is on the opposite end of the state from where Austin is. And it borders Illinois. It's on the Wabash River. It was the former capital of the Northwest Territories. So it was like a big deal, you know, it was like
Yeah.
a trading point. George Rogers Clark defeated the British there at Fort Knox. There's like this whole thing. There's a lot of history there. And so, which all of us were, it was like injected into our heads when we were growing up, and which I've come to really appreciate now. We have a national monument there, the George Rogers Clark Memorial, blah, blah.
Yeah.
In any case, it's the town does something to you, you know, like, how should I say this? Like Cade's trying to, this is in the 80s too, right? He's trying to defend a view of small town Midwestern life that's very on par with John Cougar Mellencamp.
Yeah.
Right. Or just John Mellencamp now, which is not a surprise because he mentions Mellencamp in there. My dad went to school with and played music with John Mellencamp at VU because Mellencamp went to Vincennes. He's from Bloomington and Seymour and all that area. And so I was raised in a real big sense of like, you know, you should be proud of where you're from, you know, like pink houses.
Yeah.
You know, little pink houses for you and me. This whole idea of like, yeah, we've got farmers that are, my first concert was Farm Aid, right? So you can see how bred in the bone all this like deep Midwestern stuff is without being propagandized. I don't think it wasn't like, I mean, I still hated a lot of it. I wanted to leave.
Sure.
And I'm glad I left. And I actually don't know if I'd ever want to live in Indiana again.
Yeah.
But I like going to visit, you know, my in-laws still live there and friends and stuff. So yeah, Cade's defensive because I realized at some point that a lot of the towns that I lived, and I didn't only live in Vincennes, I lived all over Indiana, but that's where I was raised, is that a lot of these towns were actually quote unquote better in the past than they were when I was living there. Right.
Yeah.
So like Vincennes used to have an opera house and the Marx Brothers toured there and all these major stars would come through. And we had like multiple movie theaters and there was like this whole, and there was like the population was bigger, you know, it was like, there's all this stuff was going on. I see pictures and I'm like, why don't we have that now?
Right.
You know, cause now it's like everything's decayed or gone or fallen apart. And, you know, the Rust Belt aspect is sort of set in, you know, and it's like, now what, you know, why am I thrown into the diaper of this town's history instead of like the shining crown of it. And you just, so, I mean, that's part of it. And I think if you read my stuff, if you've never read my stuff and you read it, you're going to find that it's not a lot of like, it's not bitterness because everybody loves being where they're from in my books.
I don't think it's bitterness at all. I don't get that.
It's like, I have a great love for the Midwest, which is why I only will probably end up writing about the Midwest, you know, because there's just something about it that I haven't yet really figured out.
Yeah.
Every book is bringing up some new aspect of what's going on in there between the people and the landscape and moods that exist.
Have you read Summer of Night by Dan Simmons?
No. Wait. Is that the one with the Nazi vampires?
That's Carrie and Comfort. I'm pretty sure.
Carrie and Comfort. Okay. No. So I've not read Summer of Night. No.
So I highly recommend Summer of Night.
Okay.
Especially for anyone who is explaining or talking about the Midwest like you have in your books and that we've just discussed here, because there are several scenes and like the book wrecked me in the best ways. And I don't even remember which state it's set in. It might be Ohio, actually. Yeah. But it connected with stuff in me, just like The Nothing That Is and Tone Bone connected with stuff in me. Like, I recognize myself in Cade and the ideas that he's talking about, referring to where he's from and where he lives. Mm-hmm. And it's weird now because it's so cheap to live in the Midwest. And in 2026, and maybe this was always the case, but like here more recently, I'm just like, what, that writer lives in the Midwest? That writer lives here or there close to me? And I do think that's part of it. And also because, like we talked about earlier, those pathways to publishing have shrunken, and you don't have to be in Chicago or New York or on the coast to do a lot of these things anymore.
Nope.
Or be taken seriously.
Yeah, it's everything's, you know, globalization did its work. It turned the world into a small village to some degree in that regard.
Yeah. I love the way that you write about the indescribable and the way that you can get things onto the page that push past the line of human perception. And I'm curious about either methods or like sort of equations you maybe have that you would use. Words like necropotent or like necropotence.
Oh, well, I can tell you exactly where that came from.
Yes, tell me.
Magic the Gathering.
Hell yes, seriously?
Yeah. I played hardcore Magic the Gathering from about 2021 to maybe even 22, a little later, to just recently. I mean, I still play every once in a while, but
yeah,
I was really deep into it. You know, I played Modern, I played Commander, I played pre-Modern, I played Pauper, I played all the things.
You're deep into it.
I was deep, yeah. And my favorite card was an Ice Age card. That's the third set they released, folks. In about, let's see, 93, 94, 95, probably 95-ish, late 95, maybe 96. And it was a card called Necropotence. And what the card allowed you to do was sacrifice your points, your life points in the game, to draw cards, as many cards as you wanted, but you'd have to pay for it. For every card you drew, you had to pay a life point, and you only have 20. And then you couldn't also, at the beginning of your turn, draw a card, because you were sacrificing your life to draw as many as you wanted.
Right.
And of course, that's a risk, right? It was a draw. It was the power of death is literally what that card means, necropotence. And so you were getting closer to death, but also getting more powerful by having more cards than your opponent and allowing you to maybe find more answers to beat them. And I really didn't labor over, like, at least in this specific instance, of like, can I use necropotence, that word? Can I use necropotent? Can I use any version of it? And I was like, because what if Wizards of the Coast, the company that owns Magic the Gathering, what if they have, like, what's copyrightable? Because sometimes they have cards that are called like Blast.
Right.
And you're like, well, you can't copyright Blast. That's stupid, right? So what I realized was, I looked it up and I did a lot of little like legal digging, and I think they have main character names, you know, like first name, last name characters that they are copyrighted. But I think anything else that's not a proper noun is not copyrightable.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I just want to run with it. And it ended up, it worked perfectly. It was the word I needed. I wish I would have come up with it myself. I didn't. They did. I don't give a shit. I used it. So
I actually think this is even better than that, though, because, well, one, it's kind of a teachable moment, because anyone who's out there listening, like, I knew that I needed to ask about that word and I didn't know why, but this literally lines up with the thing people tell you, which is that brilliant artists steal.
Yeah.
Like that.
Or you make things your own, right? Like,
right. Yes.
The famous line from Cormac McCarthy is, books are made of other books.
Yes.
And you know, that's what you have to do. I mean, so the guy who probably came up with that card was probably Mark Rosewater, who came up with a bunch of cards for Magic the Gathering and still does. And so thanks, Mark, you know, for giving me that word. You know, that's fine. I have no problem with it. You know, if people see it and then they recognize it, great. If they don't, then they still get the word, and that's all that matters. To answer your question, though, about the indescribable, do I have an equation or a formula? No, but one of the things that I think about if I'm writing something like that, which has not been in everything I write, because I do associate myself probably voluntarily most with cosmic horror than I do any other flavor of horror.
Yeah.
But I still think of myself as just a speculative fiction writer or a weird fiction writer, you know, because I'm all over the place. But when I do write something that's in that area and it's like that, I rely very heavily on poetry.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, I read just as much poetry as I read anything else. And I'm always writing down words that I don't know, trying to create a vocabulary that will defamiliarize the reader from the language, which is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, because in reality, you can't really, nothing I write on the page, nothing any other author has written on the page is actually going to scare you.
Yeah.
Like, fundamentally, it's not going to do that. What's doing the scaring is what I don't talk about.
Yes.
Right. So it's actually the reverse. I have to fill in the parts of a picture that are enough for you to activate your own imagination, and you do all the hard work. Right. So I just sort of like sketch out a little bit here and there with some terms and enough abstract imagery that is jarring or defamiliarizing, or I like the better word, estranging. Like it's an estrangement. This is all from Viktor Shklovsky, by the way, who was a Russian formalist. None of this is original with me. And you set that on the page and let that go and see what happens. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, I'm glad you feel that way, because I look back on a lot of those scenes and I feel like maybe I succeeded a quarter of the time.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I'm a pretty hard judge, but it's like, I feel like, where have I read stuff that really moved me? And that's like, that's even harder to find, because it's like, I can't even remember off the top of my head books that I've read that were sort of like trying to describe something that really is indescribable.
Yeah.
And doing a good job scaring the shit out of you.
It's tough.
Yeah.
And I do think, I mean, it's hard to confront the idea that a book's words are not the thing that is going to be scaring the reader, especially in a horror book, because I think it's easy for readers to either not engage with that concept or to be like, but that book did scare me, and the only thing they can then think of is that it was written so that they got scared, and it was clearly the words that did it. So I like thinking that you're talking about what's not on the page.
But it's also harder to scare yourself with your own writing than it is to...
Very true.
Or maybe not scare, but like affect somebody else. Because you're so close to it. Like, my goal is always to try to creep myself out if I'm trying to write that type of scene.
Yeah.
And if I get even close, I feel like it's kind of successful, because if I'm doing it to myself and I know what's going to happen, then someone who doesn't is going to have even more, hopefully, of an effect. And you can go on to Goodreads again and find many people who find that my books do nothing for them, right? One person did say, at least my vocabulary is improved, which I was like, hey, the teacher in me will accept that.
Oh, man, Goodreads. I hate you so much.
Yeah, it sucks.
You kind of teed me up for this last one, sort of wrapping up here, because I wanted to talk about formalism, and I want to talk about postmodernist story structure and your play with form. You wrote a story called Every Day You'll Get Up and Go to Work, published by a place called Super Arrow, that sort of looks like it maybe is connected, at least as far as you're toying with structure and story, to what Ship of Death is going to be doing in some ways. And I'd love to talk about that.
That's interesting. Yeah, so I think Every Day You'll Get Up and Go to Work might be the oldest story in that collection. I think Super Arrow was an online journal that my writer friend, who I was just talking to today, actually, Amanda Goldblatt, fantastic writer. Hardmouth is her first novel, was out from Counterpoint a number of years ago. Fantastic. Buy it, read it. Also a wonderful short story writer, published in many different places. Did really, I mean, if you look through some of those issues, the issues I was in it with Roxane Gay. This was before Roxane was huge, right?
Yeah. Also an Indiana writer.
Also an Indiana writer, yeah. And she was able to pull down a lot of really great people in those issues, and they're still worth reading if you can find them. That story is probably the oldest, and it's written in the form of a informative pamphlet that would be given to a worker in an underground bunker, where your job is to be a part of a cleaning crew that cleans a giant immobilized woman, like a giantess.
Yeah.
That's like comatose, basically, in this underground bunker. And the form, I wanted to talk about, you said something about, it felt like it was cheating earlier. Like, I felt like the success I had with online stuff felt like cheating because it wasn't real, quote unquote. Like, I needed to be published on paper to be real, to earn it. And I always felt this way about like short things or things that were in different forms. If I fucked around with formalism, I always felt like I was cheating.
Yeah.
And that I was getting away with something, which is, again, such an absolutely infantile way to think about it.
Yeah.
But that's how the ideology of the classical short story structure is just so a part of the air and the atmosphere, is it makes you feel like you're deviating or something. You're not appeasing the gods if you don't do what they say.
Yeah.
But the story has small sections. It's written in second person. It's the only second person thing I think I've ever written. It's funny, it's weird, it's touching, it's got maybe this one of the saddest scenes I think I've ever written in it. And I wanted something really angry. And so it was in this sort of, and I was writing it to myself though, right? So it is sort of like oddly auto-dialectical in that way. Like,
yeah,
I was trying to chide myself because I was about to leave the MFA and I didn't know what I was doing. And the story was like, every day you're going to get up and go to work. And I was like, well, what would be the most horrible job I could possibly think of? And it would be to go work in an underground bunker with a bunch of people you don't like, clean a giant person. Who couldn't even talk to you, didn't even know what was going on. And but I was always messing around with stuff because I was trying to think, like, when we were in the MFA, we were always one-upping each other.
Yeah.
And I actually, when I brought the story to workshop, I printed it out in a zine format so you could turn the pages. So I printed it out and folded all of them and stapled it so you would like have it as like a little, like less than a 3x5 zine type shape.
Yeah.
And my buddy Chris Dennis, who I was just telling you about, he was the one who was introducing my story that day. And we were also one-upping each other on how much research we were doing on introducing other people's stories. It was such an unhealthy relationship, actually. but it ended up giving a lot of really good reads. He did this whole presentation about how the story and the pamphlet had this connection with this like New Deal FDR pamphleting thing that was going on. It was amazing. I was like, oh my God, I'm a part of this like tradition I didn't even know I was a part of. Right.
Yeah.
But that, I was always looking for a form to exploit, like recipes, or you're always thinking about everyday writing, technical writing, what's a form that you could exploit. So when I got contacted about 9 months ago by Peter at Harper Collins, the editor, and he was like, I love the Nothing That Is. I've been following your career. Would you be interested in this and doing this type of book for us? Which again is a very weird thing, right?
Yeah.
Publishers, editors don't reach out to authors.
Yeah. Anyone listening to this, do not think that will happen to you.
Yeah, this is really strange. But he's like, I just know that I want a found document novel. And he's like, and we love what you do, so just write a Kyle Winkler found document novel. And I gave him some ideas, and he chose 2. They ended up choosing 2. And I wrote up some pages for The Ship of Death, and they bought both books on the strength of that. So I started writing The Ship of Death, and I already knew what I wanted. I wrote this book. This is not bragging. I'm just saying this. Like, I wrote it in a month. Because I knew what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I had time off. It was starting in the summer, and it was going into my sabbatical in the fall.
I think it also helps if you have a contract too.
And I had and they were in the money and all that stuff. It was like, yeah, if you finish this, we'll give you a nice little treat at the end.
Yep.
So when I knew what I wanted to do, like, for example, so the book is about a guy and his wife who make a little extra scratch on the side by writing after game reviews, or they'll test board games and RPGs and stuff. And this happens in real life. People will get sent a copy of a game by a game publisher, and they will try it out and write up a report and give it back and say, yeah, we love this part, we didn't like this part, maybe don't make it 6 players, make it 4,
yeah,
blah, 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 blah. And I thought, this is great. So I've got those reports. That's already a found document, right? I've got, this guy's obviously going to write iPhone notes, app stuff. There's going to be phone calls. I know I'm going to have police reports. I know I'm going to have, the number one thing itself was board game materials. I was just so excited to write board game materials, like rules of instruction, playbooks, cards,
yeah,
and I wanted to write, I've always wanted to write fake Wikipedia articles. And I'm a board gamer, a role play person. So I'm always on Board Game Geek. So I wanted to write a lot of Board Game Geek posts, and, cause those guys argue with each other just as much as Goodreads stuff. So, I was just throwing everything at the wall to see like what would stick. And then you have to kind of like jigsaw it. And again, like I said before, the story is actually in the gaps, cause it's like, I don't fill in everything.
Right.
It's like, so I give you that stuff, and you nailed it on the head. I don't think I've done anything like that since that short story. I mean, I think I wrote a fake newspaper article in one of my novels, but other than that, there's nothing really all that formally bananas. This is the first real kind of like, there's no, this is not standard,
yeah.
like, which means, by the way, and I'm still doing it. I just finished one today. The layout of this book is really, really, you might look at it and be like, this doesn't look intense. It's intense. It
Oh, I'm
takes
sure
a
it's
lot of
bonkers.
It took like 2 or 3 graphic. It's not House of Leaves crazy. You don't have
Yeah.
to turn the book upside down, but like getting it so things look like it's a board game thing, or looking like it's a police thing, or looking like it's a journal, or looking like it's a whatever, you know, you kind of have to fiddle and mess with the EQ knobs, and it's fun, but it's also stressful. And, you know, kudos to all the interior layout people at Harper Collins who are geniuses with this stuff. But yeah, and then I did it again for the substitute teacher, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it again. It's a really found document novels are very, very hard. And if you look at the found document novels that exist, like just the one that they use as a comparison for my book is Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. That book only has 2, as so far as I know, has 2 forms in it. It's the narrative, and then there's like the screenplay.
Yeah.
Which, you know, like is in Courier or whatever. So it's like interviews and then the screenplay. And it's like, okay, you've got, I'm trying to think like what else is a found document novel. Rant by Chuck Palahniuk, which is just a series of interviews.
God, I love that. Didn't Marisha Pessel write one?
Was that the one about Night Movie?
Night Movie.
Okay, so there's that one, right? I've not even looked at that book. I don't even know what that is. But I mean, I know of it, but I've not read it.
Yeah.
So, you know,
it's got a lot of websites in it. There's a lot of websites.
Right. Or Richard Chismar's Boogeyman trilogy.
By Abrams and
yes,
Doug Dorst.
Sure. That sounds right.
That's wrong.
But I think what I'm getting at there is like those books are not telling everything just through found documents. They are. There's a narrator at some point coming in and talking.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you know, this is almost like Nick Bantock's Sabine books. Do you remember what were the name of that? Something with Sabine, Sabine. They were books that were like, I think they were published by well, I can't remember who it is. They're about this big. The reader can't see this, but they're about like 8 by 10.
Yeah.
They're more landscape than vertical. And when you open them, the only way that you know what's going on is that they were elaborately designed. There would be like a really nice envelope on one page, and you'd actually pull out a letter.
Yeah.
And you'd have to open it up, and it would be, it was the correspondence between these 2 characters. And it's sort of like this it's a mystery type thing.
Does Ship of Death have inserts like that or no?
No, it doesn't, because the budget for that is not there.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I would have, man, if you would have had Peter, the editor's original idea, who's like, I want this to just be like a box that you open and there's just stuff inside. And I was like, whoa, like, what are you doing? I was sort of like, I mean, his original goals were like really cool and lofty.
Yeah.
But again, as you go through the process, you realize like Harper Collins is not going to cut out a budget for this. How are you going to sell it? Doesn't make any sense. You know, people are going to be reluctant to read a box full of materials as opposed to just a spine with pages glued onto it. So yeah, that could have been fun, but I think, I don't know, that causes anxiety in me just thinking about it.
Well, it comes out this year, I think September, right?
September 29th. Yeah.
September 29th. I am excited as hell to read it. I've loved everything that I've read of your stuff already.
Thanks,
so
man.
that one immediately rocketed to the top of my list as a must buy for when it comes out. So I'm pumped that you got it. Last thing I want to talk to you about, we've kind of already talked about it. You mentioned it way back at the beginning, and I had it in mind because you and I met. We talked a little bit off air, a little bit about meeting at a book fair here in Indiana. And I'm just curious the ways in which community still play a part in your writing.
Hugely. So when I was invited by a past guest of this podcast, Joshua Hall, to be a part of Scholastic, I did not understand that he was asking me to be a part of it as a writer. I thought he was just saying, hey, this festival is going on.
Come hang out.
You might want to hang out.
Yeah.
And when I was like, oh, you want me to be a part of it? He was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, I didn't realize that he was like a fan, or that he wanted me to be there because he like, you know, thought I was a valuable member. I was like, it just sort of blew my mind. But I owe a lot to him for that, because he's helped, you know, he widened my readership just by those 2 Scholastics, R.I.P.
Yes.
And
broke my heart.
through Scholastic and now through VoidCon, which is the other one that I'm pretty devoted to now, which is we're going on our 4th year this fall. Check it out. Keep an eye out. VoidCon 4.
Yes.
Come one, come all. I met a lot of people that I stayed in touch with. Maybe there were people I knew online, but when I met them in person at a Scholastic or VoidCon, it created, like when any relationship, when it becomes human like that, it just suddenly takes on a new depth. Like Laurel Hightower, like I'd always talked to Laurel online. I met her finally in person at Scholastic, and that made it like, wow, Laurel's a real person. She's great. She's so nice. She's so helpful. She's such a fantastic writer. She's just a stand-up person in the community. And then when I went to, but then that stopped. I couldn't see those people because I don't go to the same things anymore. And it happened. Then I got the same type of call for VoidCon from Evan and Edwin, the guys who run VoidCon. And there's other people behind that, the Void crew, as it were, who are like, hey, why don't you come out and be a part of this? We like what you do. Holy shit. Suddenly I'm like meeting all these people who I'd seen online or talked to, or who'd been publishing books I'd read, like Ira, right?
Yeah.
Ira's stuff, or Sam Richard, who runs Weird Punk. Joe Koch goes to VoidCon, and I was just obsessed with his stuff for forever. I don't know if you know Rick Claypool. Rick Claypool was at the 2nd year of VoidCon. He's fantastic. I could keep going on. You're just like meeting all these people.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, we're on a Discord and we talk every day, and, you're texting people. And I mean, you have to stay involved because they're, not because it's your duty or it's your job. It's because you want to. You just want to see you just want to talk to your friends, and you want to have support. I'll give you a perfect example of this. I told you at the beginning of this that Negative Space was one of the first books that I read that really sort of, in the space, in the indie space, that really sort of, rattled my saber, as it were, by Ben Yeager. And he ended up being a guest at the 3rd VoidCon this past fall. And I got to meet him, and I got to tell him to his face what his book meant to me and why he inspired me to publish my book in the first place, and where it led to where I was and all that other stuff. And, and now, like we talk on the Discord, or, like, it's just like, you can meet people who inspire you, and you have this relationship where it's like, it's just so strange, but it's also one of the best things about in the time that we live in, is that you can reach out and talk to these people. You can comment to Stephen Graham Jones or Joe Hill or, anybody. Yeah. I think I wrote something online to Joe Dante a couple of months ago, and he commented back. I'm like, what the hell?
It's amazing.
I know. It's like, these people they're real and they're out there. And it's like, it's anything that shrinks that distance, that creates anything that shrinks the distance between two people to create a real relationship, is always a good thing in my book. And these communities do that, all these conventions, these, festivals, these books and brew type things, but also going in person to bookstores, doing readings, sitting for signings, just hanging out. I did that for Enter the Peerless this last July, or was it June? Maybe. Yeah, June. I was lucky enough to go to at least like 2 or 3 bookstores and do readings and signings, and just kind of like hang out. And, I wasn't swarmed, I'm not a star, but I got to go to Bob's Bay Books in Bloomington, Illinois, and sat for like 4 or 5 hours while this farmer's market was going on downtown, and people were coming in. I was just like talking to all these people, just like dragging them into a conversation with me, and maybe they'd buy a book and maybe they didn't, but it was just, that was what it was about, was just trying to, like, engage with the community, just let them know, like, hey, these books are out there, and I see you and you see me, and let's make something of it.
That was my chat with Kyle Winkler, author of The Ship of Death, forthcoming this year, September 29th, 2026. Keep your eyes open for that. Again, go to bookshop.org if you want to order it through Moss Art Books and ship anywhere, or go to mossartbooks.com if you want to reach out to me and have me get it for you. Yeah, not a thematic choice to have that rocket taking off ship there at the end, but I do think it is very, very apt for what Kyle is saying there, because it really does strike at the heart of not only what I want writing to do for me and for other people, but what I've really wanted this show to always do is to say, yes, hey, I see you, you see me, let's make something of it, either, by talking or just being inspired. That's one of the reasons why I do this show. I've mentioned it several times on the show. It's very personal for me because it does help refill my creative well. So thank you to Kyle for stopping by and playing a part in that. And thank you for the books that he's published. And you should check them all out. The Nothing That Is, Tone Bone, Grasshands, all of them. Go to kylewinkler.net to see his bibliography. And yep, there are links on there that you can order stuff. And follow me online at Mossheart Books on Instagram. Go to my website, austinrwilson.com or mossheartbooks.com. But mostly, yeah, check out Kyle's stuff and definitely keep your eye open for the Ship of Death. I think it's going to be a big one. Thanks for stopping by. We'll talk to you later.